Welcome, everyone, to our next session on decoding risk, the essential role of context and prioritization to empower developers. I'm Ronen Slavin, Cycode CTO and co-founder, and I'll be hosting the conversation today. In the complex world of product security, we all know that identifying vulnerabilities isn't enough. To really empower our development teams and secure our products effectively, we need to understand the context of those vulnerabilities and prioritize the remediation efforts intelligently. But this is easier said than done. To help us kind of navigate this core challenge, I'm thrilled to welcome a highly accomplished security leader and a Cycode customer, Nick Waringa, Product Security Director at Flock Security. Nick, welcome.
Thank you, Ronen. I appreciate being here. It's great to get to talk to you.
Awesome. So let's dive in. We have an interesting topic. So we're here to talk about one of the, I think, biggest challenges in AppSec today, which is how do we get the context of the vulnerabilities to prioritize basically the remediation, to prioritize the fixes to what matters most. Obviously, the developer's time is very expensive, and again, like this is a core challenge. So I guess the question to you, Nick, is like, what is the at the heart of these issues between security and development teams?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, I think if you look back at kind of the history of vulnerability management, I'm old, although my hair doesn't necessarily show that yet, hopefully. If you look back at kind of the history of vulnerability management, back in the 90s, we did this kind of one-dimensional vulnerability analysis, and we had these notion of teams, which was I have an operations team over here, and I have a development team over here, and none of the two shall meet. And so the development team built my code and the operations team ran my code. The world has blended over the last 20 years or so. And I think as the world blends, security tooling has been challenged to kind of keep up and understand the contextual risk of the entire life cycle. And so I think the big challenge there is really understanding having those components that are in the front end of build time, developers, and what used to be the operations people, but is now also developers in runtime, understand the full context of the ecosystem, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So like if I try to kind of echo what you said, so it sounds like it's not just about like giving the developers what they need to fix it, but actually like supporting kind of a better communication between the developers and security, and kind of the context is your means to achieve that. Like this is what enables it, and this is kind of what pushes this a conversation forward. When we look at kind of understanding the context of an issue, so why is it like so important to understand like the impact to the business itself, like the risk to the business?
Yeah. So I think that you hit on it very early on with your talk about time is money, right? We're all building a product. We're all trying to build a very good product and sell it to a customer in some way. The challenge that you have is that if you're not very good at contextual risk management, what's going to end up happening is you're going to waste a lot of time, in particular development time, which is very expensive. I'm fixing the wrong things. And but I've done this in the past. I've run into this in the past. And I think the biggest challenge there is kind of prioritizing your development efforts and your developers' time, Ronen.
Yeah, I think it totally makes sense. And I guess like, if I also try to remember my development days, so, getting a bug or a security issues and then trying to figure out, okay, what's really happening, and like spending all this time to basically like create the context on your own is a heavy load. And eventually when you get to a point where you figure out it's not important, so, you get bummed that you waste so much time on this. And yeah, so it makes sense what like, I guess like this would be like the critical thing to look at. Yeah.
I think there's an important point in that as well, which is as a security team, I've run many security teams. When we bring you a vulnerability, but as a security person, we don't have really good context around that vulnerability. We don't understand how it operates within the tool, or we don't know the language or otherwise. There's a credibility loss there almost every time I bring you a vulnerability without the context I need to fully understand it as a security team. And that kind of context loss ends up with respect loss on the security teams often. And by the time your 50th vulnerability with a developer, your developer now thinks, they're hitting me over the head with another vulnerability that doesn't look like a real vulnerability within my environment, and they haven't done any research or they don't understand the context of it. And that adds a lot of friction between the teams generally.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like this kid story of the kid that cried wolf, right? Like, you go the more you go to them, then they try it and it's not a real race, so the conversation becomes less fun, and then like you said, like it eventually could manifest in kind of respect issues. So yeah, so understanding kind of this criticality, and obviously developers are a big part of this mix. So like, why is getting this information to the developer workflows or to the IDE is actually like more impactful than presenting it in some like other security tools that sometimes they do and sometimes they don't have access to?
Yeah, there's really kind of two things there. If you're going to present it to the IDE and to your developer, you're trying to get it to the closest point of ideation / creation as you can, which is going to reduce the amount of time spent on the issue ultimately, because the developers in the context of their flow, they're in the context of the code, and they can fix it quickly before it actually deploys to production. As it deploys to production, now you're involving a developer, possibly an operations person, often a security person. It's going to take a slow loop back with the Jira ticket or otherwise. The developer's got to look at it. They've got to put themselves back in the context of what they built at the time. There is tons of time waste as you catch things in runtime and you don't deliver them in build time to a developer. And I think kind of the other thing to delivering it in the IDE is that the runtime world and the IDE world where you build something, they're smashing together. You'll see this with AI and otherwise. They're all smashing together over time. And so all of that context delivered to a developer helps them build a better product on the back end, all the runtime context.
Yeah. So like, again, like to echo kind of what you said. So the first one is basically, the cost of fixing the issues, right? Like you're saying that I give it to the developers in the IDE. I pay less for that fix because A, like it's just the developer, and B, like it doesn't need to go back to that code. And I guess, talking about IDE, obviously we can't avoid like talking about shifting left. So like when we think about this notion, so like obviously from our experience and the fact that we want to be effective and obviously to save costs. So how do you like see effectively shifting left and doing it in a successful way?
It's a good question. I think we're actually, I wish we were further ahead as an industry, as a security kind of thing, with understanding context and feeding it back into development teams, the shift left philosophy, so to speak. We're not there yet, but I think we're on the verge of really understanding runtime and feeding it to IDE context. And I think it's not just security. I think SRE and operational runtime and context, like all of the runtime context is now starting to get fed more into the build time context. And as it does, you can build what I would call as more context-aware microservices. So like if I'm a developer, I want to push a microservice out, that microservice typically has been built in a siloed box where it doesn't understand the IAM principles that it knows or anything in the Kubernetes context-aware space or otherwise. But as more runtime can be fed to your build time IDE, I think what we're going to see in the coming years is we're going to see IDEs that understand almost all the runtime context and therefore can correct you on things like you've got an IAM principle and you want to reduce that, or you may want to reuse it. I think there's a lot of possibilities that are coming within the IDE itself in the coming years. And I think that opens up a lot of world of possibilities for security and finding things way earlier.
Yeah. So you actually talk about even more context, like getting as much context as possible, like to the IDE. So things that would usually be separate, kind of like harnessing the power of them working together and enabling like better remediation, better understanding of the issue. I completely agree. I think like that's more and more stuff that we see, and we're going to talk about AI soon. But like obviously AI is also could benefit of all this stuff significantly. And again, like I think we're already seeing it in the field. Um, so I will kind of quote you on something that you said before. So
Sure.
you said that, yeah. I don't know if you've been quoted a lot, but it's always fun. So you said you don't care about the buzzword shift left, but you care about being focused. So I think that's a
Yeah.
great sentence, and we will get if you can share with our audience like what you mean by that and kind of what is the importance.
Yeah. So I'm unabashedly not in the shift left camp, buzzword wise for sure. I kind of view it as a marketing term that maybe popped up about, I don't know, 5 to 7 years ago, and everybody started glomming onto it. Then it got really mixed and muddled as to what is shift left really. What's really important and what we're missing in all of this is context, context, context. So context helps you focus, right? I can understand my runtime, and if I can understand it in my IDE or my build time, now I can understand whether to care about something much more. I need more of my developers' time focused on fixing the top most important problems. And to do that, I absolutely need context. Without it, I'm just feeding them vulnerabilities in a build time. So like I could shift left all of my vulnerabilities. I could scan all of my vulnerabilities in build time, come up with CVSS results on them, send them what's called like what I kind of term as single factor risk analysis rather than actually doing compound risk analysis or multi-factor. I could just feed them CVSSs, but we're no better than we were in the 90s, right? Like go fix bug type of thing. What I want them to focus on is the stuff that really matters. And to understand that, I need to understand the context around the vulnerability itself. CVSS scores on their face are just a number ranked by somebody who has no context to your organization whatsoever and what's built in your runtime and running. So
Yeah, it's a one dimension in kind of in a multi-dimensional world. So it's part of the picture, but not the complete one.
right,
So
right.
we often hear about kind of like the security team having to deal with like huge amount of vulnerabilities. Sometimes it comes because the tools are inaccurate. Sometimes it's for other reasons. But and when we kind of think about context, so like what is the relationship between context and being able to prioritize in your view?
Yeah. So I think the tools are starting to get better at this for what it's worth. You can see it in the runtime tools in particular. They're starting to tell you, is this public facing? Is an IAM role protecting it? Are you encrypting the bucket that's behind it with data in it, for instance, or the database or otherwise? They're starting to layer all of that contextual analysis into a compound risk analysis. Which is beyond CVSS. They're adding EPSS, for instance, exploitability scores to understand what's in the wild. All of that context helps you prioritize the events that go on. The build time teams are starting to do this as well. You're starting to see better analysis of transitive dependencies, better analysis of reachability. Although reachability, I will say, is like still in the buzzword trough for me right now.
And
And
it
so
also
the
mean
build
like
time tool. What's that?
yes. I also said like reachability could mean like various things to different people, like the reachability in code, reachability in runtime. So again, like it's still been defined.
And it does mean different things to people, right? Yeah. And so it's still being defined. It's still a bit on the word area. Reachability to me, by the way, means if I'm including a dependency or a dependency of a dependency, am I actually using the code and the function within that dependency of a dependency for anything within my running code in some way, shape, or form? And I don't think we're there yet with that level of depth of analysis of my code versus the dependencies and transitive dependencies code. But it's starting to come, right? And that context is like the most important thing to prioritize, which is what millions of CVSSs on their face, which means very little, down to that minuscule piece. I think one thing we do need to catch up is we need the audit world to catch up a little bit. Right now, the audit world cares a lot about single factor analysis. They're over rotated into it like crazy. And we need compound analysis, which is actually real risk analysis, to be much more kind of respected in vulnerability management in the audit world.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think like to us, like that's why we're excited about, ASPM and kind of application security in general. I think, the whole reason that this is being formed is this exact like context need. Like you used to have like all these desperate tools. Now you want your tools to work together. You want them to be aligned and they should work together because they talk about the same thing. They can bring value to one another. And I think like ASPM is kind of the facilitator of that. And again, like I think we see it in the AppSec industry. So kind of, you know, talking about the ASPM platforms and having a central place that you see all this, you see like all the context for the security, and have this kind of infrastructure to communicate back to engineering. So I guess like from your perspective, like how do you see like this as a value driver for you, and kind of, you know, the emergence of these platforms?
Yeah. So, I draw a little inspiration from the SRE world. A lot is going on in SRE right now, and one of the things that's going on in SRE is you build it, you run it as a developer. It used to be the developer would hand off a workload to an SRE. The SRE would probably have some kind of build job. The build job would go, it would deploy their workload and whatnot. But a lot more engineering departments and teams are starting to actually say, hey, developer, you build it, you run it, you build your ops, or you build your observability on it, and otherwise. The same should be true for security ultimately. And so the developers that work in the companies that I work at, I generally look for them to take on more of the load of burning down their own vulnerabilities, understanding the context of their vulnerabilities, and otherwise. I can hire a security person in that will never know 20 languages that my company operates under, or the context in which the microservice is built in some way. So I would much rather empower the edge. And what I mean by that is essentially I want all of my developers to fix security and care about security within their workflows and their normal structures. When I do that, ASPM is enabling me essentially to give them a tool that, for what it's worth, is still not simple and perfect for a developer to use. But I would rather provision a developer into my ASPM tool, have all of the vulnerabilities broken out by either department or microservice area in some way, and have them be able to look at them and look at their kind of grades for microservices or their department, then operate in this old security paradigm of the security team holds all the tools, and I've got 5 security people that can get in the tool itself, and they're the only people that can look at vulnerabilities. Nothing is going to get fixed quick enough that way. You have to empower the edge.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think we touched this a little bit, but I think it would be great for our audience to kind of, you know, echo some of the great point that you raised. So we talked about CVSS, but kind of aside from that, like what key strategies and data point like would you recommend our audience to look for when they look for this containerization and prioritization?
Yeah. I think the runtime tools are a little ahead there. So like in the runtime, you obviously care about, is it public? Do I have permissions guarding it in some way? What microservices talk to what microservices, which by the way is a little tricky even for runtime tools to still tell you. ASPM starting to get better in that area. And container builds and understanding container builds and how they're built, and the kind of the build artifacts around building a container. And in the ASPM space or the build time space, you care about reachability, if we can ever get it there as kind of a company globally. You obviously care about some of the kind of sideways context that's starting to come in ASPM tools, like malware detection in packages and package repositories and otherwise, build artifacts within package repositories that are starting to get there. Some of the package repository tools are starting to get better at build artifacts. And transitive dependencies, understanding transitive dependencies and what you have in. So that's like deep hierarchical dependency analysis and dependency mapping of what dependencies rely on what. Because ultimately, you're probably using, I don't know, a quarter of the internet to build everything that you run with transitive dependencies and whatnot. And then, yeah, I mentioned reachability a little bit. I'm interested to your perspective as well, if you know of anything in this area.
Well, I think you touched it all. Like you start with understanding kind of, you know, what are the risks that you should be aware of in code, right? So like you talked about like dependencies, obviously, like this would be, I like to compare it to how attacker thinks. So like dependencies would be one days. Like there's always an exploit known. It's like the low hanging fruit. It's much easier to develop, to attack. But then you have to understand like, okay, how is everything assembled? So understand the build time. And then obviously when you try to prioritize, so you have to get like this runtime context. Also, an example I like to give is, you know, add a repository with like lots of Log4j examples that doesn't go anywhere. So like most security tools will ring like all the alarms and say, oh, you have to fix it. You know, you just added a test repo. So like, you know, why should you like get all this noise? And again, like I think that like a very easy way to understand kind of the importance of context.
I agree. Or your log4j is sitting in a directory that's not actually used for log4j because some vendor copied it as a dependency down, but didn't use it within their tool in any way. Yeah. A lot of that happens.
Really,
For sure.
yeah. Cool. So kind of, we're getting to the last minutes of our conversation. We didn't talk at all about AI. So obviously AI is something that we all wake up every day to see kind of the latest news in that area. It will have a huge impact on software development and obviously for securing software as well. And there's huge potential and also AI helping us to fix some of the issues that we face. So I guess like the first one, wondering if you see it out there. So do you see like the potential for AI to help with kind of aggregating different information from different tools and giving us a better view of the risk itself?
Yeah. So I think that yes, AI will help, but anybody who comes to me with an aggregation of data problem, I often challenge them and say, is that data not there for you now? And if it isn't, shouldn't you make it better? And if it is there for you now, what's stopping you from building something now rather than waiting for AI to solve that problem later in some way? I think there's a lot of data out there. We've seen this with like the onset of CSPMs, the onset of ASPMs, where a lot of the data context is starting to be pulled together. All that data context exists within AWS, for instance, when we are there. So yeah, I kind of challenge the premise of don't wait for AI. Start to work your data. Start to work with, say, your ASPM vendor in the data that you don't have and ask for features. Like you probably don't know this about me, Ronen, but I am that feature guy to you. I am like, give me feature X, give me feature Y. I want more. I want more. So yeah.
I love that. Like that's what pushes our product forward. And to me, I encourage you to give us as much as you can. And I agree with you. I think like like AI is a great tool, but you need to know where and when to use it. Obviously, it also costs money. So like I think 80% of the cases, like we can build some logic around it already today, and you don't need to throw AI on it. I do think that it's really cool to use it in the more like advanced scenarios, like to understand complex scenarios or kind of complex stuff. I do see a success in it. Also, it's like in the recent models, so obviously it's also changed a bit. But yeah, I think you're spot on that. Is there like something with AI that you see it as kind of helping us like drive better prioritization in the future or something like that?
I'll be honest with you. I think we're going to see a world in the next 3 years where your IDE has full runtime context and understands everything built and running in your environment. And that's going to be AI driven, right? Aggregating most of the context of the runtime itself. And I think what's going to happen is a lot of the AI code development tools that are out there are going to be really good at recommendations here over the next 2 to 3 years. And as they get really good at recommendations, they're going to get really good at security recommendations. And one would hope with that, they get really good at recommending the right thing, right? Like understanding your layered protections and then making recommendations to you within your IDE, not just be a plugin for your IDE that's kind of a false positive machine of things, but like say, I can see most of your runtime and I know this will be an issue in some way. So you should fix it right now, developer. I think that's coming. Like I think that I am very optimistic for a world of that nature. The double-edged sword, what I'm really worried about in a world of that nature is that I think the more we let AI do for us, the less we understand about our complex environments. And my worry is that if you can't understand it yourself, you don't know whether AI is doing the right thing or the wrong thing and recommending to you. So
yeah, it's a paradox. I agree with you. I think like that's a risk that we need to figure out how to crack. But I think like what you just described is just a matter of time. So like it's all that's left is to see how quickly it will come. Unfortunately, like we came to our time. So Nick, it was an incredibly insightful discussion on the power of context and prioritization in product security. Really, we can feel like your experience and perspective, and you highlighted things in a very simple and interesting way. Basically, we talked about the fact that finding vulnerabilities isn't the goal. The goal is to empower developers with the right information and the right time. This is what truly drives the great security outcomes. So thank you for participating in the panel and the session. And to our audience, thank you for tuning into this important session. I'll now hand it back to Karina. will be taking us on to the next session. Don't go anywhere.